All right, guys, welcome back to the Make or Break show. We're hanging out with Paul Pinto today, calling in from Connecticut, blacksmith extraordinaire. How do you describe yourself when you tell people what you do?
I guess mostly a blacksmith, but I do woodworking, metal fabrication too, but mostly right now a blacksmith.
So that's something I've always wondered about. When do people call themselves like a metal worker versus when you call yourself like a blacksmith?
I would say people who do metal fabrication and a lot more welding and like maybe people who do structural steel or miscellaneous metals or people who make railings and things like that. And then blacksmithing could be people who make knives, axes, hammers, and there's even like ornamental blacksmithing too. So there's a couple differences. And there's actually like differences in blacksmithing too. Like I primarily make tools and
Okay.
also knives. And then there's people like Rory, the dirty smith. He does a lot of like ornamental blacksmithing work, which is
Okay.
something I don't know much about, but it's a really cool like subsection of blacksmithing.
Actually, the ornamental side of things.
Yeah, yeah. That's something I want to learn more about. And that's what they just did a class on up at Jimmy DeResta's house. It was a
Yeah.
lot of like ornamental blacksmithing stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and then also, I feel like I've called people blacksmiths before, and they're like, "No, I'm a bladesmith," and so I feel like they're like, "No, like I make blades. You need to make sure make sure you understand that too."
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, there
which is
kind
cool.
of is a difference. Yeah.
Because I've had I talked with I guess Alex Steele a little earlier this year, and then shoot,
Uh-huh.
his name is leaving me, Hoffman, over
Liam
in
Hoffman, he's
Liam.
phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Super nice
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's great.
what seems crazy is like all of you guys are relatively young compared to like a Jimmy DiResta who's like pushing his later 50s. But going into your background, so I'm like, how did you get into just making in general? Before you're talking about you kind of have a woodworking background, like was your dad into that
Yeah.
kind of stuff? Like what'd that look like for you?
Not really. More like my people on my mom's side of the family, like my uncle,
Okay.
and things like that. But I actually first started making like remote control planes and remote control drones and stuff. That was
Yeah.
really the first thing I started building. Then I gradually moved into woodworking. I got a table saw, bandsaw, chop saw, the typical stuff. And then my dad brought me home a little welder and I started welding. And then I was like hooked. I started doing a lot more metalworking stuff. And then that was a time when I built my first forge. So
Okay.
I built a little tiny forge out of an old air compressor that I found. And I didn't know anything about blacksmithing. I just saw it on the internet. I wanted to build one. I ordered a burner. Um, I think I had a cheap little like Harbor Freight anvil, like a cast
Okay.
iron, which is not a great anvil at all, but
Yeah.
it was going to get started with. And then I didn't do crazy heavy duty blacksmithing for like about a year. So I've probably been blacksmithing for like 2 years now, but I
Okay.
really didn't start making anything substantial until about a year ago. That's when I made my first axe, I think.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
so going back to the RC planes, because I definitely made that growing up. I still mess around with that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
like what were you making? Like,
I was making anything from like homemade drones. I would even make
oh,
them out of
cool.
like you could make them out of wood, and you could get the little motors, the ESCs, the speed controllers, little control board. I'd wire everything, solder everything, and I would fly those around, and I would crash, and just fix them because they were made out of wood, and you can make them out of carbon fiber too. And then I would get planes. I made a couple balsa wood planes. What else did I make? I made some planes that they're actually called 3D planes, and you could fly them in all sorts of crazy ways. You could like hover them like a helicopter.
Oh yeah.
And so that was the kind of stuff I did for a couple years.
So you
And
got.
then I started working.
So how did you learn, especially on the plane side of things, like the electronics and all that kind of stuff? Like, was it YouTube videos? Like, were you just watching tutorials? Like, what was that process
Yeah, it
like?
was all YouTube. It was all YouTube. Mostly, I don't know if you ever heard of them, Flight Test.
Yeah.
That was the big YouTube channel I watched. Yeah, I always used to watch them.
What? Because I feel like a lot of people will watch that type of stuff, and they're like, "Oh, that's cool. Like, that's neat that, that guy's doing that." But like, why do you think you were like, "Yeah, I can do that too"? Like, what about that?
I don't know. I just saw it and I'm like, you know what, I might as well give this a shot. I ordered some components and I just kind of started messing around with things. I think the first thing I was this little quadcopter. And I just kind of got hooked. I loved making the things, watching them fly, seeing if they work, or seeing what things I could do to the planes to make them work better. I don't know.
That's cool. And then you
Yeah,
moved to woodworking. It sounded like you were getting into wood just on the plain side of things, like balsa wood and stuff. But
yeah,
was it just the
yeah.
next step? Like you wanted to make bigger things? Like why wood?
Yeah, I think the first real woodworking project I did was I made this little box for my sister. She rides horses and they have these little boxes that they put all their like tack supplies in. So I made her this little box and then people at her barn started asking me for them. They wanted me to make them and I kept making more and more. And then I made those all with handles at first. And
Okay.
then I'm like, you know what, I really get a table saw. So I got a little wall table saw. Um, I started getting some power tools and I got a couple of Ryobi tools. I got like a drill press and a chop saw. That's what got me started with all of that. That was really the first time I got real tools.
Gotcha. And so
Yeah.
was it mostly then kind of like the smaller box stuff, or did you ever get into like the bigger furniture or stuff like that?
I did do some tables. I actually made the desk that I'm sitting at right now. It's an
Oh,
eight
cool.
foot long desk. I did stuff with slabs, like flattening slabs with a big router jig. I made a couple tables. What else did I make? I made a bunch of stuff, but then I think the tables and especially the slab tables made me want to start making steel legs and welding legs together. So that's I think why I got there in the first place.
Yeah. So did your dad then know that you wanted to get into welding, or did he just like randomly come home with a welder?
Well, my dad had a steel fabrication company at the time. He
Okay.
actually never like was a steel worker or anything. He ended up just buying the company and running the company. But
Gotcha.
he knew I was interested in it, so he brought me home one of the welders that they had. And I just taught myself. It was a little stick welder. I taught myself how to use it, and I made that first forge. I made the legs for this desk, and then I really liked mixing wood and steel together. But I just like steel on its own too, instead of steel.
And so is your shop then? Is that like at your house?
Yeah, it's in my parents' garage. Yeah,
That's awesome.
I
Did
kind
you
of
just
took over the whole garage.
yeah, did you just gradually take more and more of the garage?
Oh yeah, I went from one bay. Then I have these cabinets that I kind of moved into the garage to make a wall. Then I kept pushing them over an inch by inch by inch, and now like full 2 bays garage. All the cars are in the driveway.
That's awesome. Did you ever have to
Yeah,
like fight your parents to like keep the cars
they were
out?
they were pretty supportive. But they
Yeah.
understand. They let me kind of
Yeah.
take over it. At least if as long as I leave them one section for stuff, then they're
Yeah.
fine.
Now, are you also building like a good bit of stuff like for the house too?
Yeah, I made it for the house. I actually need to build my mom some tables. She's been asking me to build her tables for a while, but I got to get that done. Yeah, but I make all sorts of things for the house.
That's cool. So then with even on the metal side of things and the wood, like is it all just online, like YouTube? Like is that where you're
Pretty
learning stuff? Or like
much.
have you taken any like in-person classes, that kind of stuff?
Pretty much all online. I've never really taken any classes. It was funny, actually, the first time I've actually seen other people blacksmithing other than me was at Maker Faire when they had that blacksmithing
Yeah.
exhibit right there, which is
Yeah, yeah.
really funny. I never actually thought about that, but I just don't know anyone until Maker Faire. I met some people, some blacksmiths and people. But up until that point, I didn't really come in contact with anybody um, that was doing blacksmithing. So I kind of just did it all on my own. I've never really been formally taught, but I've learned a lot from online.
Yeah. So if there's someone that's listening that wants to get into like the blacksmithing world, like who are the people like you were learning from? Like who would you like recommend watching outside of
I
outside of
mean,
yourself?
um, well, definitely the first person I saw was Alex Steele.
Okay.
He was probably the first blacksmith. Then Liam Hoffman, Black Bear Forge, and a lot of the projects those guys are doing right now are pretty advanced. Um, Then they have a ton of equipment. They're doing like Alex Steele's on like part 27 of some crazy Viking sword that he's making. So
Yeah.
that's probably not the best video to watch if you're trying to get into it, when he's doing these crazy advanced Damascus swords and stuff. But I'm sure anyone could really just type in beginner blacksmithing setup on YouTube, and they'll see that all you really need is some type of little forge. People make them even using charcoal, or they make these little coffee can forges or little propane forges, and then a hammer. It could be any type of hammer. People use ball peen hammers, claw hammers to get started. I think I used a little ball peen when I got started. And then you really just need something somewhat heavy and hard to hit on, some type of just random chunk of metal. A piece of railroad track works really good. And that's just how I got started. And then I gradually got more and more into it. I got myself a real anvil. I improved my forge. I made some tongs, and then it just kind of builds over time.
Yeah. So what was that first forge that you made?
It was a little forge that I made with my stick welder. I took an old air compressor tank. I cut it, shortened it a little bit because it was too long. I lined it with KO wool, which is like this ceramic fiber. It's a very good insulator for forges. And then I cut this little door in it. I made an hinge. I ordered a burner online. I forget what website I ordered it from. But there's plenty of forge burners online that you could order for like around $100. And I just got a little propane tank for like a propane grill, and I just started forging away. Yeah.
That's cool. So, because I know zero about forges other than what you just said. So, the burner, is that? I mean, is that pretty much just where the flame is coming from? But you still got to hook it up to like a gas source. Is that?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the most common burners are called Venturi burners, and they work by forcing propane down a tube, and then there's an opening. There's an opening in the tube right where the propane inlet is, and the propane being shot down the tube pulls in oxygen. And so with these forge burners, you want oxygen coming in with the flame too to make it hotter. If you just were pumping straight propane into the forge, the flame would be like very big and orange and kind of like that. It almost look like a campfire flame.
Yeah.
But when you add oxygen into it, it turns blue, and it almost sounds like a jet engine. And that's how you know
That's cool.
it's the right flame. But you also don't want too much oxygen. This is getting into like really specific stuff, but you don't want too much oxygen, because then you get like an oxidizing flame, and the metal in the forge will actually start to, it doesn't look like rust, but it's pretty much the same thing. It'll oxidize and it'll create scale. And then that could, it eats away at your metal. So you don't want a flame that's too oxidizing, but you need some oxygen in there to get it hot enough.
Yeah. So what was it like firing up that forge for the first time that you made?
Cool. I couldn't believe it worked. And heated up metal to over, I don't know, 1500 degrees, 2000 degrees.
Yeah.
And it was pretty cool because I've never seen something like that before, but I always would play with fire, or like want to light the fire in the fireplace, or make little campfires in the backyard, or use the grill or something. So I've always been interested in like playing with fire. I know you're not supposed to when you're a kid, but it was pretty cool to me.
Yeah. So what was that like? What was the first thing you started messing around with? Because you had the forge that you built. Sounds like you had like a cast iron anvil from
Yeah.
right, and like a
Yeah.
ball peen hammer. Did you just start to
Yeah,
take
that
more
was
metal?
it pretty much. Yeah, I just got little pieces of rebar from Home Depot. I used my channel locks as tongs pretty much.
Yeah.
And I made a couple little bottle openers. I made a pair of tongs for myself, just little projects like that. And then I kind of got tired of doing that. I kind of slowed down a little bit. But then I realized I needed a real anvil. So I got a farrier's anvil. Actually, farriers are people who shoe horses, and they have slightly different style anvils, but they still work great for blacksmithing. I got a little 70-pound farrier's anvil, and that's what I used actually up until recently. I just got a bigger 200-pound Fisher anvil.
Oh, gotcha. So what?
Yeah.
All right. So you said that the Harbor Freight wasn't great, and you said, was it because it was cast iron? Like why? Like,
Yeah,
what makes a good anvil?
cast iron's not a great metal for anvils. I mean, if you're just starting out and you need something hard to bang on, it works fine. But really, you want an anvil with a hardened steel face.
Got it. Okay.
Like you want to be able to take a hammer or a little ball bearing, and if you bounce it on the top of the anvil, you want it to almost bounce all the way back up to your hand.
Got it.
That's how you know whether the anvil is good or not. Old, like really old anvils were made completely out of wrought iron, because they didn't have steel back then, like high carbon steel. But some of the newer anvils, well, not newer, like anvils from like 100 years ago would have like wrought iron bodies with a forged welded high carbon steel top on them.
Got it.
And
Okay.
then now some of the anvils that they're manufacturing like today will be all cast steel, which is different than cast iron. Cast steel works great too. Like some of the,
Got it.
I think the Pettinghaus anvils are cast steel. So that's what they do a lot today.
So you said a railroad track. Is that cast iron, or like what is that made out of?
That's a really tough steel. Those are
Okay, cool.
actually, they make pretty good anvils if you're just getting started. You really need, even if you use a regular piece of mild steel, that works fine too. Just a big heavy chunk of any type of steel you could get, as long as it's got a flat spot on it. But a lot of people use railroad track because it's so tough, and they make like they'll grind down a little section of it and as like the horn of the anvil, and they'll have the little flat spot. I've even seen some people like they might drill holes for like a little hardy hole or a Pritchell hole.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So a
So
lot of people use those.
yeah, so you said you've been blacksmithing for a couple of years now, is that right?
Yeah,
When did you decide you kind of want to make the next step to be making, I guess, bigger projects? You mentioned you made some hammers and stuff,
yeah.
axes
I
like that.
I think once I found Liam Hoffman, and I saw the amazing stuff he was doing, making axes and knives and all sorts of things like that. Then I'm like, okay, I really gotta take this to the next level. And I made my first axe. It didn't come out good at all, but I kept doing it, kept going. Then I found a place that actually sells alloy steels, because I never even knew about all the different types of steel you're supposed to use for blades and axes and stuff. And I just kept making axes. Then I was making hammers. I saw Alex Steele's hammers. I started making those. And now I have a website where I sell both those things on there.
Oh, cool.
And also knives too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So coming from the wood side of things, um, like when I definitely first got into it, like it was all just like
Hmm.
construction grade pine, and then it's like a whole
Yeah.
another world opened up when I learned about like hardwoods and like going to
Yeah.
like an
Yeah.
actual
Yeah.
like hardwood lumber store. Like, what is that like on the steel side of things? Because like when I hear metal, like I just assume like all metal is the same, but I know you're talking about like
Yeah.
different like carbon contents. Like for people getting into it, like how do you kind of navigate that world to figure out like the stock that you actually need to use?
Well, it's different for each thing. Like if for axes and hammers and things like that need to be pretty tough. Usually they're kind of in a medium carbon range of steel. So like with steel, you have like mild steel, which doesn't have that much carbon in it. It barely has any carbon. Then you move up to like medium carbon steels, which are used a lot for hammers. And then some knives that need to be really tough, they'll use kind of a medium-ish carbon steel. And then when you move up to knives, especially like kitchen knives, knives that you want to hold an edge, a really fine edge for a long time, you use high carbon steel. And then there's also different variants of high carbon steel. Like I recently just made some Damascus steel, which for people who don't know is when you forge weld two different types of steel together, two high carbon steels, but one of the steels has nickel in it. So you could forge weld layers of these two different types of steels together. And then when you finish your knife, you dip it in an acid and it etches the blade.
Oh, cool.
So the regular high carbon steel will turn black, and the one with nickel in it will stay that silvery metal color. And there's a million different types of stainless steels, stainless high carbon steels, and things like that for knife making. That's actually something I need to learn a lot more about. There's a whole nother world about all these steels.
Yeah, because I feel like at least when I see people getting into blacksmithing, or like when I think of projects, I'm like, I want to go like directly into making like a kitchen knife or making
Hmm.
like some cool knife. That sounds like that's like jumping into like almost one of the hardest things you could make, from like precision and like the type of skill that
Yeah.
you're kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, it's if you want to start knife making, and if you wanted to make like a kitchen knife fast, it'd probably be a lot easier to do like a stock removal knife where you
Okay.
buy just a thin piece of metal, a thin piece of high carbon steel, and you don't do any forging. You pretty much just trace out the shape of the knife, the profile, and then with an angle grinder, or if you don't have any power tools, you could even use a file, and like a little file jig to file in the bevels. And you could heat treat the knife, you could hand sand it, and you could do all that without any blacksmithing. And that's probably a little easier way to go at first.
Yeah.
But then you could forge your own knife too.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So when did you decide, in addition to making all this stuff, like you also wanted to record it and like share it on YouTube?
It was about January of this year. So I don't know. I just kept seeing everyone make YouTube videos, and I'm like, I've always wanted to do it, and I'm like, you know what? I just gotta do it once because I'm missing out on a great opportunity. I've been watching people for so long. I love watching YouTube. I watch it every day. I've learned so much from it. So I thought like it would be great to kind of contribute and add videos of my own. And I thought it would be a great opportunity, and I didn't want to wait any longer. Years earlier.
Yeah. What was it like starting to hear back from people, like especially the people maybe you didn't even know?
Yeah. It was awesome because there really is a great community of makers out there, and there's really a bunch of nice people. Of course, you get every once in a while you get some crazy people commenting some weird stuff, but
Right. Right.
Generally everyone is really nice and really supportive, and they really enjoy my content. And it's a cool thing to see. It's a cool thing to see positive feedback and that people are actually enjoying the videos you make and they look forward to them.
Gotcha. So I'm looking at I think the video you did about 6 months ago, your forced air burner. Was that the one that you were talking about before, or is that a different one?
That's a different type of burner. The Venturi burners don't have any electric blower or fan. They rely on the propane to suck the air in, but a forced air burner uses a little blower. And I kind of like this burner design better because you could really fine tune the amount of air that you let in the burner, the amount of oxygen. And also the tip of the burners are different. What are they called? They're called, I'm blanking on the name, but they're not just a big open hole like the Venturi burners. They're called ribbon burners. They're, ribbon burners. They have a bunch of smaller little holes at the tip of the burner, and it makes for a more efficient burn.
That's cool. And is that the one that you're using now?
Yeah, that's the one I'm currently using. I built
Gotcha.
the forge and the ribbon burner.
Gotcha. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, is that just YouTube as well? Like, not
Yeah,
even
that
learning
was
how to
all.
blacksmith, but learning how to build like the blacksmith tools.
That was all YouTube. Yeah.
All right. So then the craziest thing I feel like I've seen is you built your own like press, like hydraulic press.
Yeah, that was not easy, especially back then when I really didn't know what I was doing. I ordered a couple wrong parts. I ordered a hydraulic system that was totally not meant for an application like this. I ordered this little hydraulic pump that was really meant for like a dump trailer, like a little trailer that lifts up and you dump stuff out of it. But then the weight of the trailer retracts the cylinder. And this cylinder I had wouldn't go up and down. It would only go up. And so it's meant for the weight of something to retract it back down. So then I had to send that back. I had to go on some website that actually sells parts for like log splitters. And that's where I got most of the stuff for the hydraulic press because they're very similar to like log splitter components.
That's crazy. All right. And so again, is that just all pretty much YouTube? Like
that was all YouTube. Yeah. And there's not a lot of videos on YouTube. There's a couple, but a lot of it was just trying to figure out what parts I need, getting them all in my garage, and then looking at them and trying to figure out how it would actually go together and function. And it's worked great so far. I think I'm going to do an update and modify some things now that I've been using it for a couple months and figuring out the kinks and knowing what's wrong with it. I think I'm going to do an update soon about adding a bigger cylinder and reinforcing the frame. Because the frame's a little small and you could see it flex a little bit. Those hydraulic cylinders are extremely powerful, and it even flexes that that 6-inch I-beam that I have on there. It's pretty
That's
crazy.
nuts. And so people use those. Like, why would you use a press versus, I guess, like a large, is it like impact hammers, like
A
the
power
ones that
hammer?
just seem like power hammers, or not? Yeah.
Yeah,
Are
yeah.
they they're doing pretty much the same thing, right? They're just different ways of getting there, or no?
Pretty much they can accomplish the same things. Power hammers are normally pretty big and expensive, and they also a lot of times require you to pour a separate footing in the ground
Okay.
because they're so powerful, and they like transmit so much energy through the ground. It would crack like my garage floor, so I would have to like dig up my garage floor, pour like
Yeah.
a depending on how big the power hammer is, but maybe like a 2 foot deep footing around the power hammer, separate from the garage floor. And they're also pretty expensive. They could start at, I don't know, maybe $5,000 and go up from there. Those are for really small ones. So the hydraulic press was just a cheaper, easier alternative to a power hammer right now.
And so for people that maybe haven't seen a hydraulic press, like it's pretty much doing what you would be doing on an anvil with a hammer, like more or less. Is that the function that
It's
it's?
pretty much, yeah. You have interchangeable dies that you put in the hydraulic press that move the material in different ways, just like the different parts of a hammer. Like you'd have cross peen hammers, straight peen hammers, rounding hammers, and you have dies that kind of mimic the different types of hammers. Same thing with like a power hammer. You could interchange the dies in a power hammer. Yeah, but it's basically just an accelerated version of doing everything by hand. I mean, I wouldn't be able to make the hammers I do by hand fast enough to actually like have a profitable business. It just takes
Yeah.
too long to make everything by hand. You could do it with a striker if you have two people, one person with a sledgehammer and the other person directing, but I'm by myself, so I kind of need that hydraulic press. You
Yeah.
could definitely make a hammer by yourself. I've done it before. I've made a hammer and many axes completely by hand, but it takes a really long time.
So how long does it take you to make a hammer with what you've got now?
Um, I could probably, depending on the style, because some are simpler designs than others, I could probably knock one out in like half an hour, maybe less. But it's funny because I could make two hammers in the same amount of time I could make one. Because while
Okay.
one's in the forge heating back up, I could be forging the other one, and I kind of just go back and forth.
Gotcha.
So it's a lot more efficient to make stuff like that in batches for
Okay.
me.
And does that include like making the handle and
Oh no, that's
finishing,
just
or
that's just forging it. That's just forging
just
it.
forging? Okay. So
Yeah,
like
it
what if
takes a little longer than that to heat treat it and grind it and make the handle.
so from like start to finish, like all the way to like I'm shipping it out the door to somebody, like how long does it
Mhm.
normally take you?
I don't know. I would say probably around a half hour to forge, maybe another half hour total of grinding, heat treating, which takes, I don't know, probably over 2 hours because you have to temper it in a little toaster oven.
Okay.
You should temper things at about 2 hours. I temper them at like 350, 400 degrees for 2 hours. And then making the handle probably takes another half hour. So I'm not exactly sure. I haven't timed it. I probably should time it so I know how long it's taking me, but
Yeah.
it's a couple hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours.
So you could go from start to finish in a day.
Oh yeah, I've made multiple hammers in a day. Yeah.
Okay. That's crazy. Going back to, I guess, just the process, like once you've got it, I guess not, I guess forged, or like you've got it shaped into what you want.
Hmm.
Is the heat treating process is like, or not heat treating, is like the hardening process, is that difficult, or is it just pretty much you're dumping it into like a liquid?
It depends on the steel. Every steel is different. They all have different like heat treating properties. The steel I use for hammers is a pretty easy steel to heat treat. It's 1045. It's pretty forgiving. Um, Basically, I just heat that up in the forge till it loses magnetism. You could hold a magnet up to it, and that's when it hits critical temperature. It's probably a couple degrees above that, above when it loses magnetism. And then for this steel, it's a water quenching steel. So I quench it in a big bucket of water. And then after that, it's hard, but it's very brittle. So you have to temper it in an oven. And that toughens it back up. You lose a slight bit of hardness when you do temper it, but it toughens. But there's other types of steel that you quench in water, some you quench in oil. That's a little bit slower of a quench. And then there's some that you just quench in air. You just leave them out to air cool and they harden
Cool.
like that.
And like, are there just charts out there? Like this is
Yeah,
this is what we use, and this is like how you yeah.
there's charts. There's even an app that you could type
Oh
in
really?
that type of alloy that you have, and it gives you all the heat treating information. I mean, there's some
Yeah.
pretty advanced heat treating techniques, especially for some steels. But for plain carbon steels, 1045 or like 1080, which is a high carbon steel, it's a lot simpler than some specialized steels.
Gotcha. And so if someone was wanting to get into like making a tool, is that kind of where you'd recommend starting?
Yeah, for a lot of tools work great at a 1045 because you could water quench it. And it's pretty forgiving. I know I've made some stuff at a 4140, especially my axes. I make a lot of axes at a 4140, and that steel's a little more difficult to heat treat. Sometimes it'll crack on you.
Yeah,
But yeah, 1045 is a really great tool to get started making tools with.
that's neat. And then you said just a toaster oven? Like, is that how you heat treated it?
You can temper things in the toaster oven. The
Temper. Okay.
tempering's normally a lot lower temperature. It could be
Okay.
anywhere from, I don't know, 300 degrees to sometimes it gets up there like 800 degrees, depending on the steel. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not an expert on that, but for the steels I use, you could definitely use a regular oven or a toaster oven, or a heat treating oven too.
That's cool. And so what's the because maybe I'm saying the same thing. Like what's the difference between
hmm
tempering and then heat treating?
Well, heat treating is actually when you're hardening the steel, when you're quenching it. So you
Okay,
heat it
gotcha.
up to a much hotter temperature when you harden it, and then tempering comes after. And you could even do tempering cycles. You could do a couple cycles of 2 hours, or some people even they'll temper tools like hammers with a torch. They'll
Oh,
temper the area around the eye of the hammer, like where you insert the handle. They'll temper that more to toughen that up more, and then leave the faces a little harder. So even Alex Steele, actually, the way he heat treats his hammers, he'll flip the hammer on its side, heat up one face with a torch, quench that one face, and then flip it back over, heat up that other face, and then quench that face. And then I don't think he even tempers it at all. I think he just hardens the faces and leaves the middle section of the hammer soft, so it's tougher.
oh cool. That's real cool.
Yeah, so that's how he
Uh,
does it, I think.
that's nuts. So is this like you mentioned that you're selling tools. Like is this
hmm
your like full-time deal or like what's your kind of normal schedule look like in the shop?
Um, it's I spend a lot of time doing that. I probably spend more time actually making the YouTube videos. But when I do get orders, I make the things for those orders. I also have to go to school too. I go to
Yeah. Well,
college.
so you're okay. Yeah, well, you sure where were you in college?
Fairfield University.
Okay, cool. So you're doing this just in
Yeah,
between classes.
yeah, and it's good because it's close to my house. So
Yeah. Do you like what do other people like in college like when you tell them that you're like blacksmith or you show them a video, like how do they react to you?
my friends are all like pretty on board with it. They think it's pretty cool, especially
Yeah.
like when they look at my YouTube channel and they see like the subscribers I have and the views I'm getting. Like recently, I've been getting I got a big bump in views, which is pretty cool. So they all think it's pretty cool. And I've made them stuff before.
Yeah. Because
So
it's kind of funny because like at least when I was growing up, when I would think of a blacksmith, I'd think of like a really old guy in like one of those
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
turn of the century shops. But then like all the people I talk with are like super young guys. They're
yeah,
uh doing really cool. So that's funny. But all right, so yeah, going back to the YouTube side of things, I know you definitely had a video blow up here recently. Was like the small axe that
yeah. The
was
the tiny axe video. That one I think has 300,000 views, which is crazy for me because I only have like 6,000 subscribers. So it really blew up, and
yeah.
it really helped me out with my channel.
Did you know that that was going to be like you're like oh this could be a project that could get traction or just kind of went out
I
of nowhere?
I knew that was going to be a good one. I didn't realize how big it was going to get.
Yeah,
Like, because I did the tiny hammer before, and I also did the
yeah,
tiny anvil, and I'm like, you know what? I got to use this tiny hammer and this tiny anvil to forge an axe.
that's funny.
So, and yeah, and it ended up blowing up. It's my most popular video by far. Yeah.
So in that video, was that like a charcoal? forge, like what were you using to heat up the metal? Because it's like you
Yeah,
almost sound like
that was just charcoal. I don't know why I decided to use that forge. I guess I kind of wanted to show how simple it was to make a little forge quickly. You don't
yeah.
need a big fancy propane forge. You could just take a couple little pieces of scrap metal. I took a hair dryer, used it as the blower, and I just got some charcoal from Home Depot or whatever for a grill and put it in there, and it works fine. It works great. It heats up the metal more than hot enough.
That's wild. So you just had the hair dryer because you had that kind of tube going out the bottom. Was that where the air was coming in at?
Yeah, yeah. I had the air dryer blowing in from the bottom.
That is that is so crazy. That's cool. So moving forward, it sounded like you're saying you wanted to get a little more into like the blade side of things, like knife making, that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. Is that kind of your next kind of avenue or things you want to learn?
Probably. I just recently made some Damascus steel,
Okay.
and I fell in love with that type of steel. I was always a little bit nervous to I was always a little bit nervous to make it, just because the material is so expensive. I always thought I was going to screw it up, and I didn't realize actually how not easy, but it was pretty straightforward to make. Especially the simple pattern that I did. There's some really advanced patterns, and if you want to look at somebody who does amazing work, you could check out Mareko Malmasi of Malmasi Fire Arts. He's actually in Connecticut. He's not too far away from me, but he makes the most unbelievable chef's knives out of Damascus. His work's like unbelievable. So I'm trying to get some inspiration for him from him, and I'm making a chef's knife right now out of that Damascus.
And Damascus, is it other than looking cool, like is it just
hmm
a like a harder because of all the layers, like it's just a harder steel or is there like
Um,
physical properties that are good about it too?
it's it pretty much performs the same as if you were just using a regular high carbon steel. But I think back in the day, like a long, long time ago, they used to actually have to make the steel themselves. They would make this type of steel called woots. And I don't
Okay.
know much about it. I was actually just watching a documentary on how woots is made, but it's they like make it themselves using like I think it's called a bloomery. I could be wrong. I don't really know what I'm talking about with this kind of stuff, but they basically take like iron ore and they mix it together with charcoal and this big like furnace that they make, and they burn it for like hours and hours and hours. And once it's done, there's like this big chunk of steel at the bottom, and they have to kind of refine that and fold it, and it makes the steel with like these very fine little like patterns in it. And that was like, I think that's what Damascus really is. I think I could be
Yeah.
wrong. I could be totally wrong. I don't know much about this, but I think that's like the original Damascus. And the type of steel I made that I refer to as Damascus, you could call it like pattern welded steel because it's really taking two different steels and making a pattern out of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, that is wild. So like you're in college now, but like this like making and like making videos around it, like is that like something you see long term, something you're wanting to do, or like do you just really like this as kind of a side thing as well?
I think it could definitely turn into something that I do long term. I don't know. I think I would like doing it a lot better than most jobs. It seems like it's a
Yeah.
lot more fun, a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, yeah. What's your major?
Uh, um, actually, last year I went to a school in New York, Parsons School of Design.
Oh, cool.
And I wasn't crazy about it. But I was a product design major there. And now I switched
Gotcha.
over to Fairfield.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
it's closer to
Uh,
home, and I could do
yeah.
more work in the garage.
Sorry, my phone is going off. We'll edit that out. But well, sweet man. Well, for people that want to check out all of your stuff, YouTube, just Paul Pinto, is that the best place to see
Yeah.
people?
So you could check out my YouTube. You could check out my Instagram. It's all linked together on my website, paulpintoblacksmithing.com.
And it sounds like the project you're working on right now is a chef's knife. Is that right?
Yeah, right now I'm making a Damascus chef's knife.
That's cool. And I'm guessing we'll see lots of pictures and videos from that coming soon.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for chatting. It was a
Thanks
blast.
for having me. I
Yeah,
appreciate
man.
it. I had a lot of fun.